So without further ado, we'll get on to the first talk, which is from, excuse me, Max Base. So is Max Base available to join us before we play his talk? I believe he is not. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to play Max's talk, and then hopefully he'll be with us later to answer some questions.
Hello and welcome everyone. Good morning. I'm Ali Mohammadi. I'm software engineer and CTO of Fastresco and the open source maintainer at GitHub. It's my honor to officially welcome you to React Global Summit, day of presentation and senior track talks. I was honored to be included in the list of speakers a couple of weeks ago, and so I'm glad to be back with you. Let me do a little market research first. How many of you are currently using GitHub Actions? How many of you are currently motivated to use GitHub Actions? In this GitHub Action talk, we will go through a couple of the topics. First, I'm going to explain what GitHub Actions actually is, and we are going to look at a specific developer workflow use case that we are going to auto-deploy a ReactJS project to the server. After that, I will explain the basic concepts of including the events, actions, and workflow, and how GitHub Action actually automates this workflow using the components. Having understood what GitHub Action solves and how it makes it possible, I will go through the most common workflow, which is CI/CD pipeline, and I will explain shortly why it is not just another CI/CD tool or hands-on demo where I will explain the syntax of GitHub Actions workflow file, and then we will go through a complete CI pipeline setup with my example for building a ReactJS project. By the way, you can use the GitHub Actions for any purpose for other programming language as well. We will build the ReactJS project into the production mode and we'll upload the production file to the server. GitHub Action is a platform to automate workflow, and it is not just another CI/CD tool. And GitHub Actions can help developers to automate their workflow, to software development workflow. And in many tutorials then I have seem to convey that GitHub Action is a CI/CD platform, but as I said, it is for automating developer workflow. And CI/CD pipeline is just one of the many workflows that you can automate with GitHub Actions. So now we need to understand what are these developer workflow. In other words, what is that the developer typically do? It is so time consuming. Who I am? My name is Ali, and you can call me Max Base in the open source world. As an open source maintainer at GitHub, I contribute and share my experience publicly as an open source package of software, and as a software engineer, I'm programming for more than 10 years, and my education background is pure mathematicians, and you can find me on the GitHub by base Max username. GitHub Actions. The future of workflow automation is here. GitHub Actions is a platform for automation your task. It can help you to build, test, deploy, pipeline, and you can run any script you want, and you can write your script in any programming language you prefer. For example, in PHP, Python, C++, Go, Rust, Node.js, TypeScript. Anyway, you can design a workflow and run your software in the workflow, and your workflow can be triggered and run it on any event you want. Also, there is a documentation publicly on the github.com documentation website. You can take a look and read more about GitHub Actions. GitHub Action is here to automate your workflow from idea to productions. Almost every project in the open source world are using a CI/CD tool or a workflow, GitHub Actions, or maybe actions of another company like GitLab. So the main idea is mostly same. We are going to use GitHub Actions. If you are going to use GitLab, that is mostly same. GitHub Actions have a community. More than 15,000 public template and package are available publicly on the Actions marketplace. On the marketplace, you're able to explore and find any package or template you want. So there are more than 50,000 packages, and you can just look at on the marketplace and search in the categorize. There are a couple lists of the categorize, and you can finding anything you want. By the way, it is possible for you to create your own software. So you can design a program in Node.js or any programming language you want and publish that software as a GitHub Actions package. So it is what others are doing and publish and sharing to others. It is how open source world are working, by help, by share, and by helping others. GitHub Actions can automate, customize, execute your software, and you can run your own software in the workflow. So there is no limitations. You can do anything you want in the workflow. For example, maybe you want to send an email in the workflow, and it is so easy for you to do that. So GitHub Action is not just a CI/CD tool. It is a workflow and automation platform that allow you to design everything you want, such as CI/CD. First of all, we need to create a ReactJS project. For creating a ReactJS project, you have to use one of the following commands. Maybe you want to use npm or yarn or npx. It's depending on you. Feel free to create a ReactJS project, or maybe you already have a project and you want to work on that. After creating the project, you must install dependency and third-party library. For installing the library and required package, you must run npm install or yarn install. After that, feel free to add more third-party library and create router, create root, create components, and working on the project. You can add anything you want to the pure project. So finally, for checking the development mode, you must run npm run dev or yarn dev for serving the project and watching in the browser. So for running the project, you must run npm run dev. Note that this serve is just development mode and it is not really ready for the production. Finally, after creating the project, we want to go to the market and launching the project. For that, you have to run yarn build or npm run build for building the project and generate production output. So finally, you must run the building command for generate production file, and this is what we are going to upload to the server, because the production mode is not similar to development mode, and production file are ready to go to market and uploading to the server. So for the summary, there are a couple of the commands for you to create a new project and installing the required package and running and serve in development mode, or building the project by npm install, npm run dev, npm run build. And for creating the ReactJS project, it's recommended to use npx command, not npm. Build. ReactJS is going to use ReactJS uses a build system. This build system bundles the app into static files for the productions. But this build system has a couple of the good and bad view. So we are going to mention the good and bad thing in the build system. What is the build process? It can automatically convert the TypeScript to JavaScript. If you are using TypeScript in the project, it can generate code that support more browser and adding polyfill layer. It can combine your file. For example, you have several CSS files and it will be joined and combined to a single CSS file, and combine all of your JavaScript file to a single JavaScript file, and it is how the build system are working. And the next feature is build system can minify all of the file. It will be remove all of the white space in your code. So it will be much better and compress and less size for the production. It will remove all of the unused line in the project and auto-compress the image file, and also the build system are able to convert image format, for example, from PNG to JPG, or compress all of the image, cropping, resizing, and convert all image formats to WebP or anything you want are already developed in the build systems. So as I said, build systems are good. So what is the bad thing in the build system? Build cons. ReactJS build system is really good and awesome, but there are some problems. After every change to the project, you must rebuild the whole of the project. So it is a bad thing. For example, you want to change the minor text or just a word. Don't worry. Don't matter. You must rebuild the project again. And it will be repeated again, and again, and it is a bad thing. Usually, building a system is slow, as Node.js ecosystem is slow, honestly. And so what's about when you are working on the larger project? When you are extending your project and adding more routes, adding more component, adding more library, and extending the project, your project is going to larger and larger, and the build system need longer and longer time. So the big and real project will take longer time, and it is really bad. Build system usually use heavy resource at the build time, so it will be use almost your RAM and CPU resource. So the main problem is every time you want to change or upload your project to the server, before that you must rebuild the project, and it is the main problems, and we are going to using GitHub Actions for automating this process. So GitHub Action is here to use cloud computing for helping you. GitHub Actions can help you do it faster and better. It can speed up your build time and speed up your build process. And why it's better? Because it can automate building process. So reducing human conflicts and setting up automation versioning. For example, maybe you want to launch the new version of your project every week and Friday, or maybe you want to launch your project after every releasing. So you can design your workflow to automate it. GitHub Action is free, and if you are working on the open source project and your project is a public repository, you can feel free and use GitHub Actions, and it is free for you because GitHub.com company love open source and they are supporting the open source project. But what about if you are working on the business, or it is a private project or enterprise? You can use GitHub Actions too. For the private project, there are limitations for you, and you can pay for more limitations and extending the feature, and it can help you for the teams and enterprise or business. So you can look at the github.com features actions website for exploring the package for private repository for team and enterprise. But if you are individuals and you are going to use GitHub Actions for your private project, you can buy GitHub Pro package for $4, and it is really cheap, and you can use most GitHub Actions feature for your private project. So if you buy a Pro package for your project, you can use the GitHub Actions. So we see about the workflow. For designing a workflow, you must follow the syntax of the workflow, and GitHub Actions workflow are using YML syntax for configurations and programming. So for designing the workflow, you must use YML syntax and programming your workflow by using YML. Feel free to use YML or YAML extension for your config files. What is YML? YML is a markup language. It is a human-friendly data serialization language and it is available in most programming language, something similar to JSON. And YML is a key value data format. But there are a couple of the different between JSON and the YML. For example, in JSON, you can't write comments between your data, but in YML it's possible, and you can write any comment or description between your data if you want. So let's look at the JSON and YML in the one picture, and you can see YML is much simpler and it has less extra character. So I think it is really good idea to use YML syntax for configuration the software, and it is really good news that GitHub Actions are using YML and not JSON. Note when you are going to convert a JSON file to YML, or maybe YML to JSON, you will lose your comment, because in YML it is possible to write the comments, but it is not possible to write the comment in JSON. So if you are going to convert YML to JSON, you will lose your comments. There are many online tools or software for converting JSON to YML or YML to JSON publicly on the internet, and you can use them if you are prefer to using JSON. So we said you can write your configuration workflow file in YML format, and you must locate your workflow config file in the .github/workflow directory. So you must create this directory in your project. Note that every repository can contain several workflow and there is no limitations, and you can design a couple of the workflow in just one repository. Let's look on a sample workflow syntax. Every workflow has 3 fields. The first is on. On can say when this workflow is going to run. For example, here we are going to run the workflow on every push. So this workflow will run again and again every time you are pushing to the project and repository. The next field and second line is name. You can write a name for your workflow. Every workflow contains a list of the job. So in the job, you can write the jobs you are going to do step by step and one by one in your workflow. For example, here we have a job, it's called a job underline name, and every job contains 3 fields. The first is name. It is the name of your job. And the second line is runs on. GitHub Actions supports several operation systems, and here we are going to use Ubuntu, latest versions, Linux. So if you are going to use another operation system, feel free to change this line. And the third line is to define the steps of current job. So every workflow contains on, name, and a list of the jobs, and every job contains 3 fields: name, runs on, steps. Note that there are many optional fields in the workflow syntax, and you can refer to the GitHub Actions documentation for more details. A workflow can contain list of jobs. For example, maybe in a workflow you want to run 2 different jobs, and it is okay. You can run one of the job in Ubuntu and another job in Windows OS. Currently, there are a list of running images supported in the GitHub Actions, Windows Server, and Ubuntu, Mac OS. Note that there is a list of the operation systems. As you can see, Ubuntu 18.04 deprecated, and Mac OS Catalina is deprecated as well. Maybe you have questions about how GitHub Actions are working. GitHub Action Runner is a software forked from Microsoft Azure Runner and Azure Pipeline Agents. Azure Pipeline Agent is the open source package and is publicly available on the GitHub Microsoft. GitHub company forked the Azure Pipeline Agents and they are working on that. And all GitHub Actions are run in Microsoft Azure Server. And it is a VM virtual machines that GitHub Actions run and install it on the VM. What about the hardware? A Linux or Windows machines has 7 GB of RAM and 2-core CPU, and the macOS virtual machine contain 14 GB of RAM and 3-core CPU. If you are going to get more hardware and resource, you must pay more, and when you are paying more, you will get a bigger and better server, and it is the real thing. You must pay for a better server. So if you are going to run the build process faster, you must pay to the GitHub company. Using multiple events. Maybe you want to run a workflow in multiple events. For example, you want to run the workflow after every push into the project and running the workflow after every fork. You can write your event in on-premise. So the workflow will be triggered after every push and fork. Also, it is possible to filtering and limit the running workflow. For example, maybe you want to running the workflow only when someone is pushing to the main branch. Or you want to running the workflow after releasing a new version. You can filter it and write only which branch are allowed to run. Also, you can run a workflow after GitHub page is enabled. So it can help you. Note that when you are active the GitHub page, you must rebuild the project. And for that, you can write the page underline build in on-premise. Let me to show you a couple of the useful events that can trigger a workflow. For example, maybe you want to run a workflow after every new comment in issues, or maybe you want to limit a workflow to a couple of types of issue, opened, edited, and maybe you want to run a workflow after every update on your project or project card, and maybe you want to run a workflow on every new pull request. So you can easily deploy every pull request are coming to your project, and it can create a ready to use and nice preview link for you. So it is much easier to preview the change. Or maybe you want to run the workflow after closing a pull request. Let's go back to our topic. We are going to auto-deploy a ReactJS project by getting help from GitHub Actions. So steps are here. We are going to design one workflow that contains one job, and our job contains a list of steps. Step 1 is clone and access to last version of the repository. Next step is to installing a Node.js version. Feel free to use 14 version or 16. The third step is to installing dependency. You can run npm install or yarn install. Feel free to do what you prefer. The next step is running the builds command. You can run npm run build or any command you want. Maybe you want to apply some change on the build file or uploading the file. The next step is to cd and access to the build directory. You can cd and change directory to the build and print the list of the file in the build directory to make sure the build process runs successfully. Finally, you must connect to the server. You can use FTP or SFTP or SSH protocol. Or maybe you want and prefer to upload the build directory to your Amazon server or Google Cloud. It's mostly the same and don't worry about it. After connecting to the server, you must copy paste the build directory to the server. Hands down. It is the steps we are going to implement in a ReactJS project. For this workflow, we are going to use 3 dependency packages for this job. The first package is Actions Checkout, version 3. These actions will check out the repository and clone and download last version of the repository. The second action is Setup Node. It can set up and install a Node.js version for you. You can customize your version you want, for example, 14 or 16. And the third one is FTP Deployer. It is a public package and it's available on the GitHub. You can check out the source code. And it can help you to automatically deploy your file to a server by FTP or SFTP SSH protocol. So we are going to design a workflow by using 3 packages. The first step is to design a workflow file, and for example, you can create a file, name it build.yml. And in that file, you must mention when you are going to run the workflow. Here we are going to run the workflow on every push. And the name is deploy website on push. And the jobs are only one job. Name of the job is deploy. And we are going to run the job on Ubuntu last version Linux. And this job contains a couple of the jobs and the list of the steps. The list of the steps are, the first one is to clone and get last code. We are going to use GitHub Actions checkout version 3. After cloning the repository, we are going to install a Node.js software. So we can use setup node version 3. You can mention what version you are going to install. 14, 15, 16. You can change it. And the next step is to running your build commands. For example, here we are going to run npm install, npm run build. After that, for make sure about the build process, it's better to print list of the file in build directory. So I recommend you to do that. Here we are going to run a command in Linux, find build-print. So this command in Linux will print list of the file in a directory. Finally, the last step is to copy paste and deploy the build directory to the server. Here we are going to use that package FTP Deployer version 1.4, and we can define the options. For example, here SFTP is true, so we are going to copy the file from protocol STP, not FTP. And you can define your host name, server address, IP, and port. If you change your port from 21 or 22 to another port, you must define it. Most DevOps engineers are changing the port to the custom for more security. So if you change the port, you must define your custom port. The next field is username and password. You can define your username and password in secret sections and not pure in the workflow file, because it will be damage to your security. It's better to keep the password in the secret GitHub Actions, not in the source code. And the next field is remote folder. you can define where you are going to upload the build directory. And the local folder is build directory. So this actions is going to copy build directory from the job in Ubuntu Linux to the FTP server at remote folder home/Maxspace public HTML/test react.maxspace.org. And you can mention what file you are going to exclude. Maybe you want to skip node modules directory or skip .git.github and .env the file. So feel free to exclude your secret and private file and whatever you not want to move to the server. It's better to monitor the workflow. So if you are going to test and debug the workflow, you must learn how to monitor your workflow. At here, we are monitoring a workflow. This workflow contains one job, and the job name is deploy. If you are going to check the job, you must click on deploy item there. So after clicking on the deploy, you will watch a list of steps of current job. As you can see, the first step is passed, second step passed, third step passed, and currently the fourth steps are running. If you are going to check each steps, you must click on the steps. For example, here we are clicking on the build project and watching what build project steps are going. And finally, after successfully running the workflow, you can run all of the steps and you can see all the steps are passed, so everything is fine. Note that when you are pushing and changing any file, something will be added after your comments message, and you can easily check your last comments run the workflow or not. For example, here we ran a workflow 4 minutes ago and one successfully checked. So we can make sure our commits move it to the server and it's builded and new production file are moved to the server. So what is next? The complete CI/CD solution. It is something github.com is releasing new, and you can check out more about CI/CD solutions for enterprise. It is for enterprise on the github.com/solution/CI-CD. Thank you for your attention, and let me to thanks again from organizer of the events. I hope I can share something useful for you and helping you to automatically deploy your ReactJS project. Now we are going to create a project, and here we are going to create a project, private add readme file, license is GPL, create repository. Next we are going to open terminal and CMD. We can cd and change directory, and next GitHub clone. After that we can change to the directory again. Now we must create a ReactJS project. For creating ReactJS project, you can run one of the following command. So we are going to run the first. We can write the workflow while the ReactJS project is creating. First thing, we are going to run the workflow. After every push, the name is deploy website on every push, and the job is web deploy, and the name of the job is deploy, and runs on Ubuntu. That steps are, the first step is to get that version, clone the repository, and we are going to use actions checkout version 3. Next step is to installing name, installing Node.js 16. We are going to use actions, setup, Node version 3. You can